Canada's top spy outlines some of the most pressing national security threats facing the nation this week. The perils of violent extremism, foreign interference and espionage headlined his speech. But what should Canadians know about the state actors behind those threats? Daniel Rogers is the director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and he is with us here in studio. Hi, Mr. Rogers. It's a pleasure to have you in studio. Thank you very much for making the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Your speech this week identified a series of security challenges for Canada. Could you identify for Canadians watching what you consider the primary, the biggest national security threat to this country?
It's a great question, but the answer I have to give is my concern, and what I tried to outline in the speech is that it's hard to find one. They're all coming at us all at the same time. We've got violent extremism, foreign interference, espionage, all accelerated by the pace of technical change. So our challenge now is actually how we deal with all of them at the same time.
Is your work evenly split, or does it weight to one of those things more than the other?
No, I wouldn't say it's evenly split, but it's hard to give you a percentage because we have to shift it pretty regularly. I talked about the need to shift operations more quickly than ever before. That's true. We've balanced between different types of violent extremism and between economic security and espionage on a regular basis.
The Prime Minister identified during the election China as the biggest security threat to Canada. Do you agree?
Well, I think it's important that we stay vigilant against the national security threats that China could pose for Canada, and I think that's going to be the role for CSIS as the government seeks to engage more, or whatever it intends to do with China.
So how would you characterize the threat China does pose then, as somebody who's privy to intelligence?
Yeah, well, I mean, categorically, we've talked about China probably more than anything else over the last year, whether it's in the public inquiry or whether it's in our public report, or even, as I've mentioned today, about espionage threats from China. It's something that remains a consistent threat for us and for our Five Eyes allies, and one we want to be mindful of. But I would also say that there are opportunities there that I'm sure the government will want to exploit. So our job as a service will be to help the government navigate that relationship and the benefits that it provides in the best interest of Canadians, while making sure the security risks are mitigated.
That leads me straight into India.
Of course.
And I wanted to ask in particular whether or not, point blank, you have any national security concerns now that Indian diplomats have returned to this country.
I've been able to engage my Indian counterpart a couple of times. It's my job to continue to set expectations for the relationship and make sure that it's one that's in Canada's interests as the government does whatever it needs to do diplomatically with India. If we see anything that is in Canada's interest to say publicly about their activities, I would be happy to do that. But right now we're navigating that relationship as effectively as we can.
So you don't see anything at this point?
I can't say anything publicly at this point beyond what we've already said, and I think we've said extensively what we had seen in the past. I think Canadians can be assured that if we need to say more, we will.
And when you talk about engagement with your counterpart, how would you describe that engagement? Has it been fruitful?
It's been productive. You know, I think it is important for us to set clear expectations of our relationships, and I think it's important that we understand each other and have the ability to engage and confront issues that are challenging for both countries.
The third of our complex countries to get into, there'll be a fourth, don't worry.
Okay.
The third is Russia, right?
Okay.
And you spoke a lot about it in your speech, in particular activities in the Arctic. And I did want to ask about the Arctic because there's a ton of focus from an economic and security perspective on the Arctic right now. As far as Russia specifically is concerned, how has their activity in the Arctic evolved from where you sit?
I think what I've mentioned today is the primary concern that a lot of people will have with Russia is their militarization of the Arctic. And Russia as a country, you know, will surprise no Canadian to know, has been aggressive and a little bit less predictable, maybe a lot less predictable than we would have liked. They're challenging international norms. We've seen sabotage operations. We've seen a war in Eastern Europe at their initiation. And so Russia, as a country with a significant presence in the region, is one that we have to pay attention to. I wasn't calling out any particular issue as, you know, necessarily one that I want to talk about today, but it's an area that we need to continue to monitor.
I did want to follow up though and ask, because I take your point right now that you're speaking more broadly, but when you talked about sabotage, for example, the first thing that came to mind for me is, has Canada been on the receiving end of being a target? Like, is Canada a target in anything that you described about Russia's activities?
I think what I can say is that we have worked with our international partners to deal with sabotage attempts from Russia around the globe. I can't confirm or deny anything specific in Canada, and I think I've said the maximum that I can say there. But the fact that Russia's engaged in sabotage activities at all is of concern, and something that Canada can't afford not to pay attention to.
May I ask, with all respect, like, why you can't confirm? Because there are other countries, like Poland, for example, that have gone on the record saying that they believe they are targets, or that this country is or that country is. Like, what prohibits you from sharing with Canadians whether or not we are specifically a target of Russia?
Yeah, so, I mean, what I would say is, if you're asking me what I've seen something specific from Russia targeting Canada, it's an individual calculation about what our intelligence says and whether we can release that without affecting our operations. Sometimes it's information shared with a partner that they also may have restrictions on whether we can disclose. So today, and the fact that I'm talking to you and gave a public speech, I'm really interested in saying everything that I can. If there's something that comes forward that I need to tell Canadians about, I'll be happy to do it.
Okay. Again, I mentioned a fourth country, and
Yes.
that is, of course, going to be the United States. I heard you speak today about how, or this week rather, about how, in your view, the intelligence relationship between our two countries has not changed. Why do you think that is, given the fact that Canadians feel like everything else has?
Yeah, well, I think Canada and the U.S. continue to have a tremendous number of shared interests in our security and intelligence partnership. Canadians benefit tremendously from the intelligence sharing from the United States and our broader alliance. I would argue that the Americans benefit greatly from our relationship with them, and that we share a lot of threats. If you think about cyber attacks, targeting critical infrastructure, our critical infrastructure is not wholly separate from those of the United States. It's in both of our national interests to make sure that we're collaborating on those issues.
Do the people you work with recognize that, free from political interference?
I mean, intelligence agencies have long been apolitical. Certainly for CSIS, we are a neutral, non-political
You
agency.
are. I'm more asking about them.
Yeah, I got the question. And I would say yes. I mean, when we work with the agencies in the United States, they are nonpartisan individuals who are dedicated to the safety of their country. And so when we work on those threats, they're not political. We're working with them in a non-political way because at the end of the day, regardless of which administration is in power, we're trying to stop, in their case, American citizens, in our case, Canadian citizens, and others from being harmed.
And what about when it comes to Canada's own, I guess, decisions around what it does and doesn't share? Has there been anything, for example, since President Trump was elected, that Canada decided to hold back?
We've not made any general policy decisions at CSIS about the types of intelligence that we will stop or start sharing. And what I've said before and continues to be true is intelligence sharing is case by case. When we find a piece of intelligence, we share it with the partners that it will benefit and that will be in our interest to share it with. And we do that in accordance with the law, which includes human rights considerations and privacy considerations and others.
So there's no kind of writ large policy as it kind of vis-a-vis the United States or policy shift. And I ask, just like if I think about, for example, some of the actions that have been taken, you mentioned how apolitical CSIS is. There are a lot of apolitical actors in the United States and the Department of Justice that have been directed by very political actors to pursue, for example, political revenge on the behalf of President Trump. Like, does that give CSIS pause? Like, actions like that, does it give you pause, or is it just case by case, case by case?
Well, case by case is the necessary action. I mean, when we have a piece of intelligence, we decide whether it is best to share or best to keep within Canadian channels or with a different partner. Maybe that's not the United States. That's always been true, and the considerations may change over time, but that process of deciding on a case-by-case basis where intelligence should be shared continues.
So the practice of targeting political enemies has not given you pause?
I mean, we evaluate each piece of intelligence case by case, and if there's a consideration that would prevent sharing, we wouldn't share.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
When we come back, backing the budget, MPs return to the House of Commons tomorrow after a week in their constituencies, and they're set to vote on the minority Liberals' big budget. We're going to unpack the stakes for all the parties with our scrum, Najud Amalis, Bob Fife, and Mike Lecouture after a short break.